Have you ever wondered about the bizarre, the surreal, and the downright strange facts that history has to offer? From the Great Emu War of Australia to the Great London Beer Flood, history is rich with peculiar tales that will make you question reality. We'll dive into wars instigated by unlikely causes, bizarre disasters that sound like they're straight out of a comic book, and moments when history took a turn for the surreal. Prepare to have your mind blown as we delve into the top 10 strange history facts. Starting our countdown at number 10, we journey to Australia for the Great Emu War. Now, you might be thinking, a war against emus? Yes, you heard it right. This unusual conflict took place in the year 1932, during a time of severe drought and economic depression. Thousands upon thousands of emus migrated into the Campion region of Western Australia, devastating crops and farmland. These large, flightless birds proved to be a formidable foe for the struggling farmers. Desperate, the Australian government did what seemed to be the only logical thing at the time. They called in the military. Under the command of Major GPW Meredith, the Australian forces armed themselves with machine guns with the hope of curbing the emu population. They expected a swift victory. But the emus? They had other plans. The birds proved to be surprisingly elusive and resilient. They scattered and regrouped, making it difficult for the soldiers to target them. The military operation was not as successful as they'd hoped. After several weeks of combat, only a fraction of the emu population was culled. Public criticism of the operation grew and the war was abandoned. The emus? They just carried on, largely unscathed. It was a war waged against emus, a war that ended in an unexpected stalemate. Despite their best efforts, the emus reigned supreme. At number 9, we have Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia. Napoleon Bonaparte, the ambitious French military and political leader, decided to invade Russia in 1812. It was a decision that would lead to one of the greatest military disasters in history. Napoleon's Grand Army, a force of more than 600,000 men, marched into Russia in June. They were met not with the expected immediate resistance, but rather with a strategic retreat by the Russian forces. The Russians employed a scorched earth policy, burning crops and villages to deprive Napoleon's army of supplies. As the French forces moved deeper into Russia, they were plagued by lack of food and the onset of a brutally harsh winter. The Russians, familiar with their homeland's severe conditions, used this to their advantage, attacking the weakened and demoralized French troops. By the time Napoleon reached Moscow, his army was drastically reduced and in poor shape. The Russian capital was deserted and set ablaze, leaving nothing for the French to conquer or pillage. Napoleon waited for a Russian surrender that never came. Finally, in October, Napoleon was forced to admit defeat and began the long retreat back to France. The retreat proved more deadly than the invasion, with the Russian winter and Russian attacks decimating the French army. Napoleon lost more than 500,000 men, proving that nature can be the greatest weapon. The invasion of Russia was a turning point in Napoleon's fortunes and a stark reminder of the harsh realities of war. At number 8, we step back in time to the dancing plague of 1518. Picture this: Strasbourg, France, mid-July in the 16th century. A woman named Frau Troffea steps into the street and begins to dance. Nothing unusual, you might think, until she doesn't stop. She keeps dancing, without rest, for nearly a week. By the time 7 days have passed, 34 others have joined her, their bodies swaying, twisting and turning in a rhythmless dance that has no end. Within a month, the dancing epidemic has spread like wildfire, with around 400 people now entranced in this bizarre spectacle. What's even more perplexing is that they weren't dancing out of joy or celebration. Accounts from the time describe their expressions as agonized and their bodies covered in sweat. Some even died from heart attacks, strokes, or exhaustion. Yet the dance went on. Despite the best efforts of physicians and authorities at the time, no explanation or cure could be found. They believed it to be a natural disease caused by hot blood. However, modern theories suggest it might have been a case of mass psychogenic illness, a form of mass hysteria where the mind affects the body. But these are just theories. The truth about what caused hundreds of people to dance uncontrollably for days on end in Strasbourg, France, over 500 years ago, is still unknown. To this day, the cause of this dancing plague remains a mystery. Coming in at number 7, we have the War of Jenkins Ear. This peculiarly named conflict was not a petty squabble over a body part, but a full-blown war between Britain and Spain in the mid-18th century. The war was triggered by trade disagreements and territorial disputes in the Caribbean, yet it's the story of Robert Jenkins's severed ear that forever etched this conflict in history. Now, who was Robert Jenkins? He was a British sea captain who, during a routine trading voyage, had a run-in with Spanish coastguards. The Spaniards, suspecting him of smuggling, boarded Jenkins's ship and, in an act of intimidation, severed his ear. Jenkins preserved his ear and years later presented it before the British Parliament. This gruesome spectacle stirred up anti-Spanish sentiments, eventually leading to war. The War of Jenkins's Ear was not just about an ear, but a culmination of many factors: trade rights, territorial control, and national pride. It was a war that lasted almost a decade, involving thousands of soldiers on sea and land. It was a war that changed the dynamics of European colonial powers in the New World. This war shows that even the smallest incident can lead to a large-scale conflict. So remember, it's not just about an ear, but what that ear symbolizes. A testament to the complex and often strange interconnectedness of world history. At number 6, we visit a time when there were not one, not two, but 3 popes. It sounds like a setup for a joke, doesn't it? But the reality was far from funny. This was the time of the Western Schism in the Catholic Church during the 14th century. It began in 1378 when the death of Pope Gregory VI left the papal seat vacant. The cardinals, under pressure from the Italian populace, elected an Italian pope, Urban VI. However, his stern demeanor and reformist zeal displeased many of the cardinals, leading them to elect a rival pope, Clement VII, who set up his court in Avignon, France. Now, 2 men claimed the title of pope, each with their own set of followers. The situation worsened when a council, intending to resolve the schism, elected a 3rd pope, Alexander V, in 1409. This unprecedented situation caused confusion, conflict, and even wars as nations and individuals chose sides. The schism was not just a power struggle. It shook the very foundations of faith for many believers. It took 40 long years, many negotiations, and the Council of Constance to finally resolve the schism. The council deposed or accepted the resignation of the rival popes and elected Pope Martin V, thus returning the papacy to a single pope. So there you have it, a time in history when the holiest throne in Christendom was claimed by 3 different men. It took 40 years to resolve the schism and return the papacy to a single pope. Halfway through our list, at number 5, we have the Pig War. It's not a metaphor, folks. There was indeed a war over a pig, a conflict that escalated to international levels, all because of a single farm animal. In the mid-19th century, the boundary between the United States and British Columbia was still a matter of dispute. The area in question was the San Juan Islands, a cluster of land sitting right between Vancouver Island and mainland Washington state. Both nations had settlers in the area, living in an uneasy coexistence. One day, an American settler named Lyman Cutler found a pig rooting around in his garden. The pig belonged to an Irishman, Charles Griffin, who was employed by the British Hudson's Bay Company. Furious about his ruined potato patch, Cutler shot the pig. This seemingly small incident spiraled into a full-blown international dispute. The British wanted Cutler arrested. The Americans called in the military for protection. For a tense few months in 1859, both British and American troops were stationed on the island, and war seemed imminent. But cooler heads prevailed. No shots were fired, and the only casualty of the pig war was, well, the pig. The boundary dispute was eventually settled by arbitration in 1872, with the San Juan Islands officially becoming American territory. Sometimes even a pig can cause an international incident. At number 4, we have one of the stickiest disasters in history, the Boston Molasses disaster. Now, imagine a wave, not of water, but of thick, dark molasses surging through the streets of Boston. This was the reality on January 15, 1919, in what has come to be known as the Boston Molasses disaster. The Purity Distilling Company had a large storage tank, about 50 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter, holding more than 2 million gallons of molasses. On that fateful day, the temperature had risen above 40 degrees, causing the molasses inside the tank to expand. The tank could not contain the pressure and burst, releasing a wave of molasses that traveled at an estimated 35 miles per hour. This wasn't just a sticky situation, it was a deadly one. The wave of molasses was so powerful that it damaged buildings, knocked a train off its tracks, and even tipped a truck onto its side. The disaster claimed 21 lives and injured around 150 people. Rescue efforts were hampered by the sticky mess that covered everything, making the cleanup a monumental task that took weeks to complete. The Boston molasses disaster is a stark reminder of the dangers of not only neglecting public safety in the pursuit of profit, but also the unexpected ways in which disasters can occur. This disaster proves that even the sweetest things can turn deadly. On the podium at number 3, we have the Defenestration of Prague. An unusual term, isn't it? Defenestration isn't something you hear every day. It's a fancy word for an act as simple and as dangerous as throwing someone out of a window. But let's rewind a bit and take a closer look at this peculiar event. In the early 17th century, in the city of Prague, a conflict was bubbling between the Protestant Bohemians and the Catholic Habsburgs. On May 23, 1620, tensions reached a boiling point. A group of angry Protestants decided to take matters into their own hands. They stormed the Prague castle, confronted 2 Catholic lords and their secretary, and, well, they tossed them out of a window. Yes, you heard that right, they threw 3 men out of a window, an act that would later be known as the Second Defenestration of Prague. But here's the twist: the men didn't die. According to Catholic accounts, they were saved by a miraculous intervention of angels. The Protestant side, however, claims they survived thanks to a conveniently placed dung heap. This bizarre event sparked the brutal 30 Years' War, a conflict that devastated Europe and changed its political landscape forever. So next time you're near a window, remember the Defenestration of Prague. As it turns out, defenestration can change the course of history. Just missing the top spot at number 2, we have the Cadaver Synod. This is a tale that takes us back to the end of the 9th century, to a period of time when Rome was in chaos. The papacy was in flux, and power was shifting rapidly. Enter Pope Stephen VI, a man who decided to make a powerful statement about his ascension to the papal throne. His predecessor, Pope Formosus, had passed away, but Stephen VI was not content to let the dead rest. In a bizarre twist of events, he ordered the corpse of Formosus to be exhumed and dressed in the full papal vestments. Then, in January of 897, he convened a council known as the Cadaver Synod. The deceased Formosus was put on trial, literally propped up on a throne, with a deacon appointed to speak on his behalf. The charges? Perjury, serving as a bishop while actually a layman, and acceding to the papacy illegally. The macabre spectacle ended with Formosus being found guilty. His papal vestments were ripped off, the 3 fingers he used for blessings were cut off, and his body was thrown into the Tiber River. The Cadaver Synod remains one of the most bizarre chapters in papal history, a grim reminder of the lengths to which people will go in their pursuit of power. In this strange event, not even death could save you from the law. And at number 1, we have the Great London Beer Flood. In the heart of the bustling city of London, on the 17th of October 1814, an event occurred that would go down in history as one of the strangest disasters ever recorded. This was the day when the city experienced a flood. This was a flood of beer. The Mew and Company Brewery on Tottenham Court Road was home to a number of massive vats, one of which held over 1 million pints of beer. On that fateful day, the iron rings around one of these colossal containers snapped, causing a domino effect. The resulting tidal wave of beer burst out into the streets, engulfing everything in its path. The scene was chaotic. Buildings crumbled, people were swept off their feet, and the streets of the parish of St. Giles were awash with beer. The wave was so powerful that it demolished 2 homes and a pub, and claimed the lives of 8 people. In a twist of fate, the brewery was taken to court but was not held responsible for the accident. The event was ruled as an act of God, and the company received reparations from the government. Despite the destruction and the loss of life, the Great London Beer Flood is remembered today as one of the most bizarre incidents in history. It serves as a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of life and the power of 1 million pints of beer. Who knew that a flood of beer could cause such a disaster? So there you have it, the top 10 strange history facts. We've journeyed through the bizarre corners of history, from the Great Emu War of Australia, where large flightless birds clashed with soldiers, to Napoleon's ill-fated invasion of Russia. We've danced with the victims of the dancing plague of 1518 and listened to the echoes of the War of Jenkins' Ear. We've grappled with the ecclesiastical chaos of the time when there were 3 popes and chuckled at the absurdity of the pig war. We've waded through the sticky aftermath of the Boston Molasses disaster and peered out of the windows during the Defenestration of Prague. We've sat in judgment at the Cadaver Synod and finally toasted to the memory of the Great London Beer Flood. Each of these events, as peculiar as they are, remind us that history is indeed stranger than fiction. Until next time, keep questioning and exploring the world around you.